uh, para peneliti senior yang saya hormati, para peneliti media muda pertama, terus ini ada partner saya kira ya dari luar juga yang hadir Pak hari ini, ya, dari NGO, kemudian adik-adik dari STP. Sorry, please allow me to speak in bahasa Persia. Hari ini tadi jam 10 kami telah menandatangani kerjasama antara pusat riset perikanan, dalam hal ini di Balai Riset Pemulihan Sumber Daya Ikan, PSDI. Mana ini jagoannya? Pulang aja nih. Yang sama ngaco aja. Itu SKP itu. SKP itu. Ya. Jadi dalam mendatang ini bekerja sama dengan James Cook University. Kita bekerja sama nanti dalam hal hiu dengan mantare. Kerjasama itu melingkupi nanti ada dua hal, yaitu dengan James Cook kita akan memasang kamera umpan di beberapa kawasan konservasi, ada 3 di Pulau Pieh, kemudian di Berau, tapi masih yang di bawah Kementerian Kelautan Perikanan ataupun Dinas Kelautan ataupun Perikanan. Kemudian satu lagi di mana ya, Mas? Jika selain tadi Pieh,
Natuna dan
Berau,
Pak.
Ya, sama Natuna. Jadi kita akan fungsinya itu untuk mengidentifikasi hiu ataupun mantare dengan kamera yang dipasang di gugusan terumbu karang lah. Mudah-mudahan tidak merusak ya terumbu karang. Kamera tidak merusak terumbu karang.
Tidak Pak.
I hope that the camera will not destroy the coral reefs.
We're very careful.
Yeah, okay. Please be careful. Otherwise, you will find like the what's that? What? Caledonia. Yes. You heard it?
I heard about that. Yes.
Jadi kita akan bekerja di sana. Selain itu juga capacity building, kita akan mengirim beberapa peneliti ke Australia untuk memperoleh training di bidang hal ini. Saya kira ini suatu kemajuan yang kemajuan yang cukup baik, karena seperti Pak Tohi, we are the biggest one of the biggest producer of sharks in the world. But I think the first is India, who produce the shark fins. Ya. Jadi Indonesia merupakan negara yang memiliki memang spesies ikan hiu yang cukup banyak, hiu yang banyak, kurang lebih 128, about 118. I have to ask him. He's the expert. I am not the expert. Dari sekitar 200-an lebih hiu di dunia. Juga mantare, kita juga kaya raya dengan mantare, jenis-jenis mantare. Dan ini menjadi perhatian kita karena memang saat ini CITES itu sangat concern dengan dua hal ini, yaitu hiu dan mantare. I will not talking too much. First of all, I'd like to thanks to Professor Colin for your coming and for our cooperation. Today, he will give a lecture about the status and conservation of sharks in the Indo-Pasifik. We hope we can discuss a lot dealing with these matters. So, Colin, time is yours. Please apologize, I will be here only 1 hour because I have another things to do.
No problem.
Thank you. We also asking gently for Pak Duto to help us facilitate as a moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Master of Ceremony, Mr. Dika Pak Andika. Before we start with the teams, I would like to introduce to Prof. Colin that among us here, since we're talking about the status and the conservation of sharks and in the Pacific, it's probably related to the stock status of the sharks. And before we talk about the stock of the sharks, so I would like to have some composition of the audience here. So the sex ratio probably within 2/3, but it's more female audience than male, and the percentage of the people are major is only 10%, and maybe 30% is post majors, and the rest is young and juvenile. So it's quite complete composition. So the background education, it's high level education, PhD more or less 10% less, and the rest is to be the next candidate for PhD. That's all about the audience, and the director Tony also one of our experts. Pak Darmedio, hopefully two gentlemen there will have some knowledge to discuss with us. Gentlemen, Professor Colin is director of Center for Sustainable Tropical Fisheries and Aquaculture, James Cook University. What is Cairn, Singapore, and Townsville? It's a branch.
Great campuses in
There's 3 campuses. Singapore.
Singapore, yes.
Yeah, Townsville. So it's good for young audience then. And he has been working on for a co-chair for IUCN. Kalau yang nggak tahu IUCN ya mestinya tidak bekerja di perikanan begitu. IUCN adalah satu lembaga yang komisi yang menetapkan status spesies masuk dalam kategori terancam atau tidak. And kalau mau publikasinya, you can open the Scholar Google, so maybe 100 publications are there. So gentlemen, I would like to let Professor Collins to start the discussion. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, thank you to everybody who's made my visit here very pleasant and very friendly. It's been wonderful to be here and talk about working together on a really interesting project, which I'll mention as I go through my talk. So, that's the title of my talk. I want to talk first about sharks and what I mean when I talk about sharks. So, when I talk about sharks for this talk, I'm going to talk about all of the cartilaginous fishes. So it's not just sharks as we know them. Here's the bull shark in Fiji. But also sharks, when I talk about sharks, I mean also the stingrays. So the rays, things like manta rays, stingrays. And also a fairly uncommon group, the chimaerans, which are also cartilaginous fishes. And so this whole group all belong to a single class. And so we call them more broadly the sharks. And across all of those 3 groups, there are currently about 1,150 described species. Now, we still don't know a lot about sharks, and every 2 weeks or thereabouts we describe a new species. So that number is increasing all the time. So there are more sharks still to be discovered. And Indonesia is one of the places that we've been doing a lot of that work. A lot of the new species are coming from places like Indonesia, Philippines, and lots of other places in Asia. And as most people know, sharks are high-level predators in the ocean, and this obviously means they have an important role in our marine ecosystem. And so making sure that their populations are healthy is obviously good for the ocean. Now, those 1,150 odd species, where are they? Well, the vast majority of those animals are on the continental shelves of oceans. So you can see the darker the brown colour here, the more species. So coastal areas in particular in the tropics are the most diverse. And in fact, Indonesia probably has the greatest diversity of sharks anywhere in the world. And so Indonesia is a very important place for us to understand sharks. But obviously, what the figure shows is that in the open oceans between these continental areas, there are very few sharks, or the diversity of sharks is quite low. Now, as many people may know, there are a lot of concerns globally about the status of our shark populations. And so in 2014, the Shark Specialist Group, of which I'm one of the co-chairs with Nick Dolby, produced this paper on the extinction risk of sharks and rays and chimaeras. And what this paper did was basically look at all of the species that were described at the time and looked at their conservation status. And it basically used the IUCN categories all the way from extinct down to least concern. And so all the species were categorised over a period of about 10 years. A huge amount of work went into this evaluation, and the rather sobering and concerning fact that came out of the analysis is this number here. 24% of shark species have an elevated risk of extinction because of our activities in the ocean. That's 1/4 of all species of known sharks, rays, chimaeras are threatened with extinction. And so this obviously is quite a large number, and we see it in similar sorts of levels of threat to extinction that we see in things like amphibians and the reef-building corals. And so this obviously is of great concern to the management of our oceans. Now, we can break that number down, that 24% down, into a little bit more detail. And using the IUCN criteria, we found 113 species were classified as vulnerable. 43 species were classified as endangered. These are ones that are even closer or of greater concern in terms of extinction. And 25 species that were critically endangered. These are species that are very, very badly affected by human activities in the ocean and are quite likely to go extinct if conservation efforts aren't undertaken in the near future. The other thing that came out of this analysis was that we have very poor data on the status of shark populations in the world. And in fact, 47% of all known species have insufficient data to assess their status. So essentially, these three groups here came from only half of the species of sharks that we knew the status of. What we were able to do with this analysis was actually take the characteristics of these ones we knew were threatened and apply those characteristics to the data deficient species, of which there was over 450, and actually identifies those ones which we thought were likely to be threatened as well. And so these are ones that we want to prioritise our research and management efforts on. Probably the biggest surprise that I had when we actually finished this assessment was that there are more rays that are threatened than true sharks. And in fact, quite a few more. 107 species of ray are threatened with extinction, whereas it's only 74 species of shark. And so what this showed was that, in fact, for species like this sawfish here and many others, there are a whole range of threats that we hadn't necessarily anticipated. And so, starting when we finished this analysis and published the report, we've made it a priority to actually start to study the rays in much more detail as well as the sharks. And we can actually look at what groups of sharks and rays are the most threatened. And this fairly complicated figure here tells us basically what the most threatened 7 families are. And they are, interestingly, 5 of those families are rays. One is a shark that looks like a ray, so the angel shark, you can see the profile of here, looks a lot like a ray, so it's flattened, just like a ray. And the only thing that looks like a true shark are the thresher sharks, the only true shark group that occurs in that list of most threatened families. And interestingly, it can also tell us the least threatened, and in fact all of the least threatened species are from deep water. So all of these least threatened 5 groups here are all deep water animals. Now we can look at the pattern of threat across the range of different habitats in which the sharks and rays occur. So this is my very bad diagram of the profile of the ocean, the deep ocean, continental shelves, and up into fresh water. So in fresh water, we don't have a lot of species. There are only about 30 or so species that live in fresh water, most of them in the Amazon. but about a third of them are threatened, and about half of them are data deficient. Then if we move to the coastal areas, we have a large, too fast. We have a large number of species, and nearly 500 species, of which about a quarter are threatened with extinction. Then in the epipelagic, so out here in the open ocean, between continents, a small number of species again, only 39, but nearly half of them are threatened. And so oceanic pelagic fisheries are obviously one of the biggest threats to some of these epipelagic shark species. And then in the deep sea, again, a lot of species, so particularly on the continental slopes, about 480 species, and only 5% are threatened. What this analysis also let us do was identify where we see the biggest issues in terms of the conservation of sharks and rays. And so this is a map of what we call residual extinction risk. So it takes account of the fact that there are some places where there are greater diversity, and also thinks about where those threatened species occur. And so there are a couple of hotspots. One is here in Indonesia, where we see quite a lot of threat, going up into Malaysia and Thailand, in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean Sea, where I think the colour here is probably actually not as bad as it should be, and also on the coast of South America. So in all these places, we know that there is greater risk to the sharks and rays than most other places. The other place that risk is quite high are in the open oceans, and you can see these orange areas all represent quite high levels of threat. And so this lets us identify, where is it that we should be focusing our research, where is it we should be focusing our management. And so obviously Indonesia catches many sharks, but it also has great diversity. And so I think this demonstrates to us that research here in Indonesia is important,